the closer we can get the analysts to think about creative things to do with the data, as opposed to sitting there trying to figure out how to get data into the tag management system, the more value we're going to get out of stuff like data layers. Because I know there's a lot of young analysts out there who have a ton of really, really, really good ideas and really creative ways to solve problems.
Welcome to 33 Tangents, a roundtable discussion covering a wide variety of topics from digital analytics to working remotely to current happenings in business and technology. Your hosts, Jason Thompson, John Naran, Jen Coons, and myself, Jim Driscoll, all live in different areas of the world, but work together in the same company. Our regular day-to-day conversations often go off in various directions, and the goal of this podcast is to share our ideas and find new ways to engage with others. For me, the gym is kind of like my sanity, especially working from home. Sometimes it's like, other than my wife, my chance to see other people. Let me rephrase that. Other than my wife, it's a chance to have other kind of human contact throughout the day that isn't on a phone or WebEx or something like that, and actually be in the presence of other people.
For me, my sanity is the opposite. It's hiking out in nowhere land where all I run into are deer. But I haven't been able to do it because I hurt my freaking foot from like overuse, too much hiking without taking a day off. So like my foot, I got some tendonitis and it swole up. It's better today. So I'm thinking I can get back on my hiking routine. I just need to learn to take days off. It just feels so good and refreshing that I don't want to stop, but I know you need to take a break every once in a while.
You can practice handstands, and when your legs get tired, when your ankles get tired, walk upside down on your hands. We're supposed to be adaptable, and
I don't know about that adaptable.
Look, man, I guess you could always do arms. I mean, strength training if you don't want to do.
I don't have any machinery for it.
Body weight, man. Push-ups.
Yep.
And
push-ups, sit-ups.
That will last about 45 seconds.
Yeah. I'd go hiking, but I'd run into cars. Probably the same in Philly, where there's not any hiking in this.
But there's probably a lot of really cool abandoned buildings. So I follow a couple of guys on YouTube that go and explore abandoned buildings and malls and stuff in urban settings. It is super cool. I'm sure it's highly illegal, but it looks really fun.
If I want to get stabbed by a meth head, I think that sounds like a great plan. Otherwise, I usually.
Man, you guys are just shooting me down all over.
No, I'm not shooting.
What I was going to say is, where I'm at, like there's not necessarily close hiking trails. I can go out and say walk 10 minutes to a trail, but about 30 minutes away or so, depending upon time of day and traffic, you have Valley Forge National Park. Cool. So I can go out to Valley Forge, and I mean, it's just wide open spaces that there's various trails that you can walk and bike and stuff like that. And then there's a few other like preserves around here you can do that. But again, that's something where you got to jump in the car and go to. So that's something that's like a Saturday afternoon thing. Like, let's pack up, and now in this case, pack up the stroller and then take them for a walk through Valley Forge.
Yeah, I feel incredibly lucky, and I think that's part of why I'm trying to get out there more, is that I can literally walk out my back door onto a trailhead that connects with an 11,000-ish foot summit in my backyard, and I never have to drive anywhere. I can get from my backyard to that summit by a trail that runs through there. And
that's awesome.
It's like you got to take it. Not that I've been to the top of that mountain, but technically you could. But I jump on that trail and kind of go up into the foothills a bit, and it's like I walk out there, I'm like, this is amazing that I can walk out of my backyard into this trail system. It's pretty cool.
That's awesome.
That is really cool.
And
that's the one thing. Like, I've actually been talking to a few people about where I'm at. Like, I'm technically in the suburbs of Philadelphia, but it's becoming very, very crowded. It's almost like, in my opinion, reached like this classification that's between urban and suburban.
Yeah.
Because when you think of suburbs, you think about, more spread out. Kind of where I'm at right now, it's you definitely can't call it urban, but it's definitely not suburban anymore. It's definitely more crowded. So like this morning, went to the gym, came home, and then ran out to do some grocery shopping because we just need food in the house, and just trying to get from one area to another because everyone else is out right now too. It being Good Friday and everyone's out getting their stuff for Easter, and tomorrow being Passover, everyone's out getting their stuff for that. It was just chaotic getting from one end of town to another, and that's why I'm like, yeah, it's not quite suburban anymore. So that's the one of the downfalls of where I'm at.
Sounds rough.
Mine's mine's definitely not the safest place in the world where I live.
Yeah, I think I was talking to Jim once, and he's like, "Yeah, hold on, there's gunshots in the neighborhood."
Yeah.
Oh wow.
No, it's in my backyard. Really. I live. All right.
It was something like that, right?
Yeah, 100%. I haven't heard gunshots in a while, to be honest. It's been months, really. It used to be like a weekly thing. I have Section 8 housing kind of behind my house, and so like Atlanta housing it's interesting. Either you buy a house that's like, 40 years old and it's like ugly as hell and a lot smaller, and you could live in like a nicer kind of semi urban / suburban type of area, or you can get a really nice house, live an hour away from the city, with no traffic, or you can get a really nice house, but you live in kind of a transitional area that's close to the city. And I chose option 3. It's a really cool spot, but like I'm right by the jail, number 1, which is also a police station, which is also where I go renew my tags every year for my car, which is nice, that one time per year. So there's that, like less than a mile away, and then in my backyard I have like Section 8 housing, which is fine. I don't care. It's they mind their own business. I mind my own business, and it's like I don't like living next to apartments, period. I don't care if it's Section 8 or regular apartments. And I'd be, I feel like in Memphis, there were a lot of apartments that were like that had college kids in there, and that's like way worse than like any other apartment complex you could live next to, like by a long shot. I'll take gunshots over college kids.
Having been a college kid that lived in an apartment next to a residential neighborhood, I can confirm that I was probably one of those guys.
Yeah, I was part of the problem too.
I think we all were at some point. So now we're like, the older folks like, get off my lawn. Like I am close to becoming that get off my lawn guy because we live in a row home, and of course, like, okay, I want to kind of keep it up, make sure the lawn looks nice, and of course the kids come running along.
Is that like a townhome?
Just a strip of, townhome, row home. Same concept. So of course I am quickly becoming the get off my lawn guy.
Yeah, and he's gone full dad. He was out in the front yard the other day in jorts and white socks,
fucking
and
own it, man.
Sandals, and he had the trimmers out, and he was trimming the shrubbery.
Honestly, that's a lot more.
No, I had the stalls all out and was ripping out evergreen bush.
You dressed up way more than I dress up. I'm in right now. Like I went out the other day. My lawnmower doesn't work, so I got my weed whacker, which it's like not a gas, or it's not gas, it's electric. I went out there with my weed whacker and cut my front yard, and like thong sandals and like pajama pants and an undershirt.
Nice.
It's just out front cutting. It looks awful. My whole yard looks awful, but anyway, no shame in that, man. Own it. Own it.
For sure. So our listeners may recognize the voice. We have Jim Gordon back already.
Oh, was this recorded? Oh no!
Oh yeah,
Damn right.
This is going to be part of the random conversation to kick off the show.
I dropped a couple F-bombs here and there. I hope that's not like, oh man.
You're trying to get us an E rating.
I am. That means everyone. That stands for everyone in video game world.
Is that what it is?
E for everyone. Yeah.
E for everyone. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yeah. No, it's good stuff.
Kids out there.
And so we just dropped today, as we're recording this, we just dropped episode number 1 with our esteemed guest here, which has already, been popular. You've gotten a lot more likes than I have on the LinkedIn post of the episode.
I know, that was weird.
You must have a more faithful. You saw that too, right?
Yeah, it was funny.
You have a bigger following than I do.
I don't think so, man.
But all right, Driscoll. So what are we looking to do? I know we had lots of follow-ups. You need to keep, with Jim Gordon and I on. We could talk for like 2 hours and never get back to the subject. So
that's true.
No, and I can just add to that as well. So I want to pick back up with the episode we had last week. So I want to continue the conversation around data layers. And a lot of this is because there's just so much to talk about. And I knew going in, one episode would not be enough. And so last week, we really delved into the details and the technical ideas around it, talking a lot about, Jim's blog post, appealing to Adobe to set a standard, and talking about why the W3C has aged and where we may have to go with that. But what I want to do is I want to take a step back and talk about more of the business side this time with data layers, and really talk about why the conversation we had last week is so important and why it is important to get into those details. But let's talk about that, as well as for those that are listening, a data layer is a lot of times a hard sell in an organization. A lot of times when you go to your program managers, when you go to senior management asking for development resources to put code on the page, the first question is how is this going to impact revenue? What is going to be the lift in whatever metric they're looking at, whether it's revenue, visits, visitors, whatever? What is going to be the impact of adding this and having development spend time on it, and actually working and developing and deploying it? With a data layer, there is no direct benefit, and benefit may not be the best word to use, but it's not going to be used for some kind of remarketing campaign. It's not going to drive revenue directly. There's other benefits toward it. So, and Jason, I know for the last couple of years, you and I have written articles multiple times about the value of a data layer. So let's spend some time talking about the history, how we've gotten to this point, and why it's necessary to dive into the details like we did last week.
Sure. Well, I think for one, data layers can be used for stuff like remarketing, and I think that's going to be part of the value proposition that we talk about. I mean, indirectly, they don't press the go button on a remarketing campaign, but
correct,
you can add, you can put in put additional details into stuff like your tracking pixel, which directly impacts your campaign. Which, by the way, that's starting up with a value prop. But before we go into the total value propositions, let's we'll take a step back and talk about a little bit of a rehash of our conversation last week, where when we sold these tag management systems, the value proposition was that development would spend less time doing development work, right? That wasn't just me. That was other tag management vendors as well. And people still probably sell on that basis alone. Saying, okay, well, this is your new jQuery container where you can listen for stuff to happen on the page. And I have my own thoughts about that, but that was the value proposition when we sold through tag management. Now we're kind of pulling a reversal and saying, oh, yeah, that value proposition where developers, you didn't have to spend as much time implementing these like individual line items on the page. Yeah, we were kind of looking at that through a different lens. I mean, it saves time on some stuff, but let's backtrack a little bit and start implementing this inline stuff again. And as a developer, I can't reconcile what the difference is between implementing. I mean, I could, but it's like, there's an education process associated with it, and I don't think that developers are incentivized to necessarily understand literally everything that we're doing and why we're doing it. I mean, a lot of them do, and I'm not giving them enough credit, but this is the issue that we've run into where we're like, oh, okay, yeah, that value proposition of that tag management system that was going to save you a ton of time. By the way, we're going to kind of walk back on that a little bit, and now we've got to implement stuff. And that's when we have to come up with a really good value proposition, a really well-constructed value proposition to get this work prioritized. So that's the situation right now.
So can we dive into that a little bit more, because it's an interesting topic to me for a couple different reasons. Number one of the propositions, value props to the development team was that we were going to build something that was more native to what they were used to as a front-end developer. Whereas before, I had to, as a developer, learn a whole new lingo and language if I was implementing Google Analytics or Adobe or fill in the blank. Like, everyone has their own kind of unique way of referring to data and variables and things we were capturing. And so one of the promises of the data layer was you can forget all about that. You don't have to understand any of this Adobe speak or Google speak. You just pass something in a human readable format that makes sense to you in a way that you as a developer would do this for any other project that you were working on. And I think at one point in time we were moving down that path. And then I don't know what happened, but something seemed to pivot to a point where it became even more messy than it was before, even though we weren't necessarily talking in the vendor lingo anymore. And I'm not sure why that was.
I think it's the W3C.
Is it?
Yeah.
I mean, there was definitely something there. And for me, the biggest concern was what you just brought up, in that I want the developers I work with to be intimately familiar on why they're doing things.
Mm-hmm.
It's critically important. I don't want them just setting a variable or a value in a data layer. I want them to know the why, because having seen it work like that in the past, it's amazing when they're invested and care how much a valuable part of the project team they become, because they can start questioning and say, okay, I see what you're trying to solve. I have a little bit better way to do it. Or I see we're passing X in. It doesn't make sense in that scenario because it's going to give you Y when you do your analysis. And so my concern of them not being invested in that is concerning to me.
Yeah, you're right. You're 100% right. Actually, in several instances where I've consulted with some companies, and I've spoken with their analytics team, and they're like, I just don't get why we can't get anything done. I'm like, okay, well, have you spoken with the developers? I'm like, yeah, we replied on the Jira ticket. This is what they're saying. I'm like, no, have you like talked to them, like met them in person? And they hadn't even met these folks in person. They haven't spoken to them before. And that was shocking to me, because I was like, well, there's a certain level of personal accountability associated with when you build relationships with not just your developers, your stakeholders as well. I mean, you're probably talking to a paid media team, or you're talking to some business unit that wants to get a thing done, and it's like the shit just rolls downhill, and the developers will feel like they're at the bottom of that hill, and that shit just hit them at the bottom of that hill because some task was handed to you, and then you're handing some task to that developer, and saying, oh hey, by means of this game of telephone, you should do this, and then it just kind of muddies everything. But the more we operate like we're a team, the more we operate like we're all humans, and we all have certain motivations, different motivations, but I mean, we all want to see each other succeed. And I think the more personal accountability you build with your development team, especially your development team, because so many people just overlook it. It's like, oh, they're just a means to an end. No, they're your partners. They're your partners that can vouch for you when you need to get shit done.
So are you saying that it's, and I think I agree with it, if I understand what you're saying, that it's really more of an organizational issue than it is a technology issue? Because again, I think that's one of the things that collectively we hoped with the introduction of the data layer would magically solve, was this gap between the business, the analysts, the digital analysts, and the development teams, because we could at least now start talking a common language. And when it didn't fix it, we sat there wondering why. So is it just an organizational issue? Is it an issue also with the technology, or I'm guessing maybe
Jason,
a combination
it's
of both?
one simple answer. There's one single thing. No, obviously it's a combination of both. It's like if it was a super easy fix, one of us would have already written a blog post on it and had it taken care of.
The top 3 things that you can do.
15 reasons why your data layer. Actually, I kind of wrote that with the data layer versus CSS selector thing, but
what the Mueller report means for your tag management strategy.
That's a good LinkedIn post, man.
That's some LinkedIn gold right there.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, obviously it's a combination of these things. I think ultimately at the end of the day, so like a good way to understand, a good way to approach problems is to understand the outcome that we want. The outcome that I want is I want data layers to be a prerequisite. I don't think it should be a question of whether or not we implement a data layer. It's, maybe it's broken up into a phased approach because, okay, we have this is an enterprise website. We don't have the resources to do all of this at once, but at the very least, we can begin with the important stuff, and with the understanding that this is a phased implementation for a data layer. And I think that's the language that we need to fix. And we addressed this last week as well, where it's, it doesn't feel like a prerequisite. And for consultants, maybe it does. Yeah, like the people listening, you're probably like, well, yeah, it's a prerequisite to me. That's what you sound like. Yeah, it's a prerequisite to me.
Wait, say it one more time.
Yeah, it's a prerequisite to me, Jason. I'm Jason Thompson. Oh, duh. Data layers, obviously. It might be a prerequisite to you, but we're just a small corner of this analytics industry. We're a very, very teeny tiny corner of this analytics industry.
So let's dive into that a little bit deeper, because I agree, and it's not just a data layer thing. That's been something that we've been trying to make happen since I got into this industry in 2004, 2005. Is we've constantly asked, how do we get analytics integrated as a core part of our platform development? And we're 15 years later, and we're still not there. And I think we've gotten closer, but it's a step down. If I'm developing a new page for my site, then I go through a checklist and say, okay, I need to make sure the jQuery library is included. I need to make sure our common header and footer are there, so we have the nav gets included and legal's happy because we have all the legal copy down in the footer. I don't even think twice about it, right? Like those are things I have to include in any project that I start. How do we get to a point where the analytics infrastructure is just as important in that conversation as all the other pieces that are standard in any new site development that I would do? Because I haven't seen it in any company that I've had the opportunity to work with where that works all the time.
Well, I think arguably people haven't been motivated to make decisions with their data. In my opinion, our industry is in, it should be in something of a bubble where this is kind of a hot take, so turn on your air conditioning. But we have a lot of analysts out there who aren't doing a heck of a lot with the data that they collect, and I don't think there's motivation to implement something like a data layer if they're not using the data for anything of substance, and
we're gonna have to have Jim come back for episode 3, which is where we're gonna talk about that, because you're right. I mean, that's like a whole other episode, and I think I even have written some content about that. Is that our industry is overwhelmingly technical, and I don't say that in a bad way, but we hire technical implementers and we put the title of analyst on them, and they never really fulfill the role of analyst. At best, they create some reporting and distribute some data around. And I think that that's having the unintended impact of what you just described, is the business isn't really seeing the full value. Thus, we haven't been invited to the big kids table at Thanksgiving dinner. And the requirements of getting analytics in is important, but it's not A1 critically important, because there isn't really massive decisions being made on the data on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, and I'd also argue, this is a super spicy take too, that some organizations might even save money without an analytics department, period. But that's, like I said, a totally different conversation. And let's tie this back to what we were talking about before. What are the value propositions of a data layer? And I have a list based on conversations that I had with some folks about data layers. My offer still stands, by the way. If you want to talk about data layers, hit me up on Twitter or LinkedIn, and I will literally sit on a call and talk to you about data layers as long as you want. It's productive. These are productive conversations, and I like to think about, I like to get new perspectives, and anyway, you get the idea. All right, so the value proposition.
Can you talk about, and you can come back to this, but can you talk about the type of people that are reaching out to you? Is it consultants? Is it practitioners? Is it SaaS vendors? I'd love to get a sense of who's excited to talk to you about this stuff.
It's a good mix. To be honest, I haven't spoken to anyone who wasn't a data layer believer. It's mostly just passionate practitioners who. Well, actually, I had one conversation with someone who wasn't a believer in data layers, but that I think it was a. I don't think it was a person not believing in data layers more than a person whose product's basis, the whole purpose of the product is to try to not to. It's basically like a tag management cell. Like, oh, you put one line of code on your website and you're tracking everything. So we're kind of back at the front. And maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But that wasn't the purpose of why I was trying to talk to people. So the people I spoke to, it was a few consultants. I'd say about half of them worked on client side for like larger organizations. Most of them were pretty tech. Actually, no, I take that back. Half of them were very, very tech savvy. The other half were more on the business marketing side, which was really cool, because we got to talk through like every dimension of data layers and trying to find the value proposition, how to justify it, how they justify it, how they implement it. And it's really interesting. They all had different ways of implementing data layers. Even with Google Tag Manager, people had different ways of implementing the data layer. Now it was more narrow in scope, like with Adobe DTM and launch. The breadth of methodologies that were used for data layers was super wide. Whereas Google Tag Manager was like, okay, yeah, we use data layer.push, but on top of that, we also use stuff like HTML5 data attributes and mixed in some CSS selectors here and there. But where we net out with that is that I have 5 key value propositions. I have to reread all these notes, and there's certainly more than just these 5. But the first one is reduce maintenance for your implementation. I know that it sounds counterintuitive because, yeah, you still have to maintain a data layer, but I can't instruct a designer and a developer to both alert me when a specific thing changed. If I'm using CSS selectors, like, oh yeah, developer, hey, let me know when this class name changes. And the developer's like, I don't care. Developers like, I don't care when a class name change. Why do I need to memorize when these class names change? And a designer, hey, by the way, let me know when you change a class name or an ID. And the designer's like, I don't want to have to add an extra step to my process. So reducing maintenance, we send out one set of instructions to developers. Developers, if you see this function that looks like data layer dot update or data layer dot push or some unique function that's specific to analytics, let us know. And that's a lot easier than some of these more these other more malleable methodologies. By malleable, I'm using that in the context of it's easier and expected to change the elements that drive the data layer, like CSS selectors. Not as much. I think HTML5 data attributes, those are less malleable. Those are more static, I guess. Someone's going to yell at me for using like the word malleable and static in the wrong context, but you get what I mean. Okay, so reduced maintenance, right? Because it's hard coded on the page. I don't have to worry about CSS stuff changing. We have consistent definitions. I mean, this is the biggest one. Consistent definitions. My data is consistent, right? I don't have terms coming in Spanish, English, French, Hindi, you name Mandarin, you name a language. I've seen it. There are languages that I've literally didn't know existed until someone used Google Translate on my site. And actually consistent definitions also in that, Jim, you and I were talking, we actually had a conversation, and this came up when I was talking to you about different departments might define revenue differently.
Correct. I've seen that. I've seen one of two things happen around that. There's, you could have two different teams define revenue differently. One could be just gross revenue, the total amount paid by a customer, and the vendor that they're working with wants that, versus, say, another team wants net revenue, so the amount paid per product. You're not including shipping and tax. And then there could even be a third translation where we want product revenue, we want shipping revenue, and whatnot. So one of the situations is with the data layer, you are able to ensure you're able to produce the various permutations. But then the other case is it also enables you to ensure that if there's an organization-wide definition for revenue for all various analytics and marketing tech vendors, the data layer conforms to that. Because what I've seen in the past, and this is going back, just as tag management tools were really coming online, you still had companies putting out the vendor-specific code onto the page. And in large organizations, a lot of that work was being done in silos. So you could have, like, say, one marketing conversion tag being done by one project team, an analytics update being done by another project team, and both requirements just say revenue. And I've seen it where you had revenue calculated as two different things. So then it starts this whole scenario that spins out of control is why doesn't revenue net? Whereas with the data layer, you're able to ensure that if two different tools need two different definitions of revenue, you can support that, but then also ensure that in as many cases as possible, the same value being defined for revenue is being sent to all of the different vendors involved.
Mm-hmm. And that's, I think the same goes with way more than just revenue too. It's I can't tell you how many times I've seen the dimension called language in an implementation, and I'm like, wait, is this browser language? Is this the language of the current site? Is this and building out a data layer also, it segues really neatly into constructing your all of your data definitions, and that's yeah, go for it.
Yeah, and I was going to say, with that, talking about, defining your data definitions, that you're ensuring that there is a standard across the board. Because we've talked about this many times, Jason and I, and Jim, I know you've been pulled into this, the dreaded question of why don't these two systems net? And I mean, there's already reasons off the bat, and I don't want to get too far into this, but again, just another common example to use where with the data layer, you're able to implement standards for various metrics, the common one being revenue, or in this case, you bring up a good one with browser, with language, what language are we talking about, and whatnot. You're able to ensure that there's standards in the data that you're sending off to various vendors so that it doesn't unnecessarily cause discrepancies, and then next thing you know, you're hunting for a needle in a haystack.
Yep. And so another value proposition we have is more detailed data. And what's interesting about but more detailed data, right? I'm not going to sell my company to build a data layer if by saying, oh, well, we'll have more detailed data. I don't think that's sufficient. But I think if we put it in the context of a story, if we're good storytellers with what we can do with that data, like put yourself in the shoes of a product owner. I remember Ben Gaines and it was either Blair Reeves or Corey Spencer, where we're talking about how to tell a story as a product manager, how critically important that is to communicating, priority and impact of the features that you want to build and deploy. Being able to tell a story with your data layer, it runs in a similar vein. We want to have this we want to prioritize this, and if we don't have a story, if we don't have like an outcome, a specific outcome that we expect, then I'm not going to prioritize that as a developer because, like, oh, you just want this data for the sake of having extra data. Well, no, I want this because Jane, the paid media manager, can target people with more detail if, obviously that's too vague, but can target people who live in this region and have this type of grass. All of this is in the data layer that we can pass into, let's say, a remarketing pixel. As a lawnmower service, I know that I can retarget this person because they are more likely to convert, right? Because I know more about my user. I'm not suggesting that people will know what type of grass they have in their lawn, but ultimately you're trying to tell that story. You're trying to add characters to that story, and I did a really bad job of coming up with an example because I'm just riffing, but but you get what I mean.
Yeah, no, you bring up a great point there, and this is also another thing that you and I talked about when we had that initial conversation is when so one of the gigs I had about 10 years ago, working for an e-commerce platform provider, and I was the one doing the analytics implementations. And at the time, we were we were working with the developers to deploy the vendor specific code through the page. And one of the things that enabled us to do was to get the deep data that isn't native to the page. So when the tag managers really started to come along and you had a very aggressive sales environment and you had that one line that always drove me nuts, it's, hey, just pop our code on the page and you can move everything into our single container and
pop it.
Just pop it in there and you're good to go. But that sales pitch makes the assumption that all of the data that you need is native to the page, which is far from the case. So like we were talking there about more detailed data or deeper data that's available, whether it's for an analytics implementation, so you can get a deeper understanding of who your customer is around, like, say, profile data when they're authenticated, or a remarketing campaign, knowing not just that they viewed a page, but what third level category does this product fall into, or what's the manufacturer, things that may not necessarily be native to the page or native across the site, for example. You may know a product manufacturer when they're on the IDP, but once they've added a product to cart, and here's another really detailed example, they add a product to cart, you have a persistent cart, they leave, they come back, they view the cart, you see that the item's in the cart, but you lose all that detailed product data. Again, that could help enhance, say, a retargeting campaign.
I think you're absolutely right. And so if someone's asking you to just pop something on the page, slap it on the page, just stick that right in there on that page. You can do that.
I'm breaking out in hives hearing that.
It's a quick ask.
Yes.
First of all, ask is not a noun. Folks who are listening, I have a quick. You have a question. You don't have an. Anyway, moving on. The if you want us to pop it on the page, I mean, one of the huge value propositions of a data layer is it brings us closer to just popping something on the page with more detail. The lead time to implementing pixels on a website dramatically reduces with the data layer, right?
Again, yeah. And Jason and I actually proved that out maybe about 2 years ago. We were working with a client and we were able to, again, we were actually able to get some really good details on it. And I'll make sure, Jason, we put this in the show notes as well. Link back up to that blog post we put together, differentiating between no data layer, TMS without a data layer, and then TMS with a data layer. We were able to highlight the savings you get being able to do just exactly that, Jim. Pop something onto a page.
I think we should ban the word pop this tag onto the page. Just quickly implement this thing, ban it until you have a data layer, and then you can say pop. You get pop rights back when the data layer is on the page. You get pop rights back. That's when you get pop. You get to pop things.
Yeah, I'm a fan of that. Again, because a lot of that just brings back bad memories of, also the whole phrase of like quick wins. There's a quick win. There's no quick wins without a data layer, and that all goes back to 2 years ago with the sales pitch of the TMS, knowing that what clients wanted to do, and it couldn't be done without that data being exposed to the page.
Like quick wins, it's kind of like when you're doing it without a data layer, it's like play stupid games, win stupid prizes.
Yeah, but like honestly, I've just flat out banned the word quick wins from my vocabulary because the times I've seen it used, it's turned out to be anything but quick and be a win.
Well, I mean, that's our that was the whole value proposition in Las Vegas. Quick wins, man. It works 100% of the time, 25% of the time. So slot machines and table games, it's fantastic. So I think another note I had is it's really interesting. I was talking to some people and they were like, well, you have to build a process around data layers. And it was really funny. I heard this from a couple folks where it's like, Why not just build a process around CSS selectors? And it's like trying to design around, like, yeah, because data layers, they do require some kind of process. They do require some level of education. We have to, that's part of evangelizing this whole concept, is educating our stakeholders, our development partners, and that does require a process. But it is far more preferable than building a process around CSS selectors. Now, I'm not really good with analogies. I know some people, like, right off the cuff, they're really, really, really good with analogies, but that's just like, that's like your kitchen getting destroyed in a fire and you saying, well, we'll just order out pizza to work around this instead of fixing your kitchen. And then for the rest of your life, you're just ordering. All right, stop it. Oh, I thought you were like groaning at the analogy.
No, it's lunchtime, and now I'm even more hungry.
I actually had lunch just before this, and I had a hamburger, and I went out to get it, and I have a kitchen upstairs.
Did you rate the hamburger?
I don't rate places that I love, because I eat hamburgers.
Where did you go? Shout out. Where did you go?
I went to this place called Skips. It's out here in Avondale Estates, Georgia, which is right by Decatur. Most people have heard of Decatur. The place is awesome. It's like you have to level set your expect. So for the listeners, I rate hamburgers around Atlanta. The thing is, though, there's some places that I eat there for a very specific reason. It's not like either it's nostalgia or sometimes I just want to enjoy a hamburger. It doesn't have to be a 10 out of 10. Skips is one of those places. Is it a 10 out of 10? No. But it's awesome. It's just like, it's a cool place. Like, it's like an old school fast food place that's been around for about 30 years and just stuck around somehow. Like, battled through, like recessions and stuff, like somehow it's still there.
And I have that place here, and I think I'm scared to take you because the burger's probably a 3 or 4 out of 10.
Doesn't matter. It's like,
I've been going to this place since like 1984 or 85, and it's still there, and it's the same burger, and it just is amazing.
The worst people you can go out to eat with are the ones that say, "Oh, this isn't real pizza." Like, shut up, man. Just let me enjoy my pizza. Like, are you enjoying my company? Like, do you like the atmosphere? Do you like sitting outside by this nice fountain in beautiful weather? Like, the pizza doesn't have to be like, oh, this isn't New York style. Like, I get it, but just try to enjoy yourself. Try to enjoy your meal. I've probably done that before in the past, but like, shut up and enjoy your food. Don't ruin it for everybody else. I do that with burgers. It's like, people want me to rate it. I'm like, and I'm fine with it. If you really want me to rate it, I will tell you how it rates in comparison to the best burger place in Atlanta, which in my opinion is One Eared Stag, the meat stick. I rated it at a 9.8. This is like factoring in 4 different variables. But it's one of the best. It's One Eared Stag. It's out in not Kirkwood. I don't know. It's close to where I live. But it's like expensive-ish. And like, if you go there, you get a burger, and if you get a cocktail, the cocktail's like $20. And if they're good, it's worth it. But like, I don't want to go there every weekend to get a burger. Anyway, One Eared Stag.
All right.
Excellent.
I'm gonna have to link it up. But I was just doing a domain search because I had an idea.
Yeah.
You need to start a new service and a site called ratemydatalayer.com. The domain is available.
Too hot to handle.
Where you rate data layers. How amazing would that be? But honestly, that was one of the ideas we had for Tactician early on, right? Is that we were going to build a library of implementations that could be researched and stacked against each other and see who was doing things well and not. And Anyway,
Yeah, one of the trickiest parts, if I'm an analyst and I'm just getting started in analytics, like it's funny, before I worked at search discovery under Evan Lapointe and Erica Barber, I thought, oh man, the Dunning-Kruger, on the Dunning-Kruger chart, I was like, which is basically like thinking you know more than you actually know. I was like right there at my peak, right there. Like, man, I know what analytics is, and I have no idea what I don't know. But after getting in there, getting into the weeds and seeing all these different implementations, learning from them, and like effectively rewiring how I thought about analytics, like literally had to rewire the way that I think about analytics, and showing me like you don't know what you don't know. I mean, to me it's like I want people to go through the same type of experience where they're exposed to stuff that they hadn't been exposed to, so they could take their smug face and realize that there's so much more to it, and there's obviously so much more that I have to learn too. So I might rate data layers and it's like, Jim, you don't know what you're talking about. So I'm like petrified of doing that. Like I'm very, very careful now. I try to carefully criticize. I try to. It's so easy to be a critic, but I try to.
it is.
I try to be careful about it. But the whole basis of Tactician was like, I have this opportunity to show people all different types of implementations and help us learn from what other people are doing. Like that was the whole basis of it, was to create this library and say, like, look, this is how people implement stuff, because it's so easy to fall into the trap of imposter syndrome. And I definitely have imposter syndrome where I'm like, I'm not good enough. Like, I'm not good enough. I need to learn more. And sometimes that made me in my past more impulsive, because it's like, you never think you're good enough. You never think that you are, that what you're doing is sufficient. You never think that what you're doing is like industry standard. But then you go out there and you look at what everyone else is doing, and a lot of people feel the same way. B, you look at other implementations and they're making the exact same mistakes that you are. You look at them and whether it's because of business processes or because of lack of knowledge, it's humbling. And you learn to quickly stop criticizing so much stuff. I mean, yeah, I still do it every once in a while, but I try to be careful and mindful of the fact that I was there. I was in that position before. So I'd love to go and rate data layers. If you want me to, raise your hand and I'll go in and I'll tell you my gut opinion on your data. Just stop raising your hands. You're consultants, damn it. And I just told you, I don't know. I'm full of shit. I don't know what I'm talking about.
No, that's not
I'm an
true.
imposter, but
False lies. No, but it is a really important point, and it doesn't have to be one person going out and rating. But one of the things that I did early on, and I'm still trying to do now, is go out and look at what other people are doing with their implementations. We can learn so much by just studying what others are doing. And when it comes to data layers, I would strongly encourage anyone in a technically focused role to make time to do that on an ongoing basis, and not just looking at our competitors, but just across the board, searching out and researching and studying what other people are doing. You can learn a tremendous amount without even talking to them, just spending the time trying to understand what they were thinking through their design process.
It's kind of interesting too, because on the flip side of it, where I think people don't know, new analysts, like folks who are new to the industry, it's, sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and oftentimes you don't know what you don't know, and that's okay. What I've done with my team, folks that I manage, which I'm not much of a micromanager, but it's also easy for folks who are new to the industry to come in with the assumption that, like, well, I know that I know there's a whole lot that I don't know, but at the same time, I learned just as much from them as they learned from me. And with data layers and stuff like that, yeah, I might have an opinion because, 10 years ago, this is what made sense to me. But for the folks who are listening, I'm sure you've had these moments before where you've sat there in the meeting or something like that, and you thought, well, this doesn't sound right. This doesn't sound like it makes sense. I should say something, but nobody else is saying anything, so I'm not going to say anything. Your gut is often your gut at a certain point. You'll learn when your gut is right and when your gut is not right. And like, so when should you trust your gut versus when should you hold back and do some more research? I found that like with strategic stuff, oftentimes, this is personal experience. I like literally everyone has a different experience with this. I found that the junior folks that I've worked with have had a really, really, really strong intuition for whether or not some strategic decision was good or bad. Obviously, there are cases where it's like, okay, maybe that's you're not thinking about business process, but when it comes to technical stuff, sometimes it's a lot more difficult to just trust your gut. Like, oh, trust me, just implement this gigantic 2 megabyte library. I trust my gut on this one. Like, all right, hang on. there's still some things that you need to account for. But for stuff like data layers, where it's I've seen people who I admire structure things where I'm like, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And then I asked them about it, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. There's some sort of dependency there that I didn't think of. Or maybe it's just fundamentally more efficient to do things a certain way. Anyway, the whole basis behind that is to come full circle with our conversation yesterday as well. Having a more standardized data layer helps us it's helps educate, but not standardize in terms of schema, but standardize in terms of how we send data to tag management systems. It helps us teach analysts who might not necessarily be familiar. So where their strengths are maybe in trusting their gut about strategic recommendations, where they have a lot of creativity. I used to be a whole lot more creative when I was in my early to mid 20s than I am right now. I'm creative in different ways, but like the closer we can get the analysts to think about creative things to do with the data, as opposed to sitting there trying to figure out how to get data into the tag management system, the more value we're going to get out of stuff like data layers. Because I know there's a lot of young analysts out there who have a ton of really, really, really good ideas and really creative ways to solve problems and really creative ways to look at a business. And what stands in their way is this technical bullshit that we have to solve and have to get this stuff prioritized, and then they lose steam, then they burn out, and then they go make turquoise in New Mexico, do something with turquoise. And I was quoting.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, I was quoting "It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia," but I messed it up.
Yeah.
I'm not good at segueing into quotes. I was like on a tear, and then I end it with like a weak, like.
No.
Like, let me just come full circle. Here's a quote. I don't think that's the exact quote.
The quote.
Well, on that note, Jim, let's just.
On that note, it's been an amazing conversation. The hour has flown by. And I've really enjoyed the conversation. As I talked about last time, especially if you are in a technical role in MarTech, you should be following Jim on Twitter. You should be following and reading his blog, jimalytics.com. Amazing content. I know it's hard to put content out, and I always wish that you do more. But I know it's difficult, but it's refreshing to see the type of content you put out, that it's not just fluff pieces. It's things that are well thought out, and you go into great depth and detail in your post. So
Thanks. Yeah.
if you're in any kind of technical role, you should be following Jim and consuming this content. Really, really good stuff. And again, appreciate you coming back for a second time to join us on the podcast. It's been a really fun discussion.
Of course. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks. I promise my blog content is less scatterbrained than sometimes I go with my tangents. Because I'm from Atlanta, I'm from the Southeast, y'all. I go on tangents, all right? And my blog posts are a lot more focused than that. I try to write it and then rewrite because
it's the whole name of the podcast, so it's all good here.
Exactly.
It's what makes it fun. It's just kind of going off.
What makes it real. It's real. Yeah. Excellent, gentlemen. Great conversation.
Yep, a lot of fun.
All right. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Right, bye.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. We hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to reach us, you could do so by emailing podcast@33sticks.com or on the web at www.33sticks.com. The 33 Tangents podcast is a production of 33 Sticks.